Today's episode is brought to you by Fire Facilities. Make training count with their custom-made all-steel live fire training facilities. Their made-in-the-USA towers and burn rooms are the best for preparing, responding, and surviving the challenges you face every day.
Yeah. Hey. 3-point firefighter, always ready for more. Saving citizens and leaving egos at the door. Another day up in the life, showing you what it takes. Got the hunger, pride, drive, spirit that never breaks. Yeah, always there when danger is threatening. When seconds count, guess what? We're counting the seconds. 3-point firefighter. 3-point firefighter. Hey, IGAF.
All right, so welcome back to 3-Point Firefighter. Today's guest is the Swedish fire nerd, Lars Axelsson. Now, when I asked him, give me a short intro or a bio that I can use to tell people, and he basically said, just tell them I like talking about fire stuff. So that's your entire intro. How's that work?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's great. I mean, it doesn't really matter who I am, where I'm from. It's just a matter of my opinions. I think, judge me not by my character, judge me by the content of my speech. I don't know, something like that. Isn't that sort of very American say?
Yes. We also say credit cards. We also say cheeseburgers, apple pie, and baseball. That's how you sneak all that in. So it's fair to say you travel not over just like locally. You travel all over the world preaching the gospel on the fire service. You tell me if I'm wrong, and you like to teach and preach the gospel of the fire service based on science plus experience. And you've probably seen more of the fire service than I would say, 99.9% of the firefighters in the world today. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes and no. It's, I traveled a lot before COVID. And then, but after the COVID, that of course that would dent in the calendar. My calendar went from like 2 years booked to 0 for like 2 weeks. That was scary on so many levels. By that time, I got small kids, and after COVID, I was sort of like, nah, I don't want to travel as much. So the traveling part has gone down, and I try to do much more back home. But I've really missed going around the world. So yeah, I've been around, done, a lot of countries and firefighters. But the thing, I got the question a lot, especially, what's the best fire service? Where do you go to learn something like that? This is a really hard question because I don't meet the average firefighter. I meet the nerds, and like nerds are the same everywhere. Like they're up to date with the UL studies and so on. So, I mean, it's very hard to judge like what's the average firefighter in a country and so on. But I get one snippet. I get their stories about their problems and what they do and what how they operate and sort of. So I get at least a perspective that many people maybe lack. So on that level, I've probably seen and heard a lot of stories from different countries. And of course, that's part of my experience of, like if I hear 10 different people from 10 different countries describe the same problem, and then it probably is a problem.
Yeah.
If I say 10 people from 10 different countries say we have a solution for this and everybody says it works, then it probably is a fairly good solution. So because it's, I always try to look for universal truths that seem to be working, no matter, for instance, building construction and so on. I look at that first and see what is universally true. And that's very good if you look at different countries and different systems. And because there's so many differences, but, fire is fire. And in terms of science, but science is problematic in terms of it's so limited in the amount of science we have. And you can spin the science in so many different ways, depending on what you want to say. And you can cherry pick, and you at some point have to cherry pick because there's so little data and so on. So it is I would say a needed match of experience and science that has to be in the end, because you're not going to learn firefighting from a scientist unless it's a firefighter scientist maybe. But like you wouldn't learn one single thing of use if you read about combustion process. Like it would help you. It would help you a bit doing firefighting, but
No,
it won't
it
make.
would be a lot like reading a book on how to remove an appendix, right? You're
Yeah,
getting the science, you're getting the
yeah,
absolute truth, but
yeah,
applying it is the
yeah.
problem. That bridge is
That's a whole
learning and
different. Yeah,
applying.
yeah. That's a whole
So
different ball game. And also, I mean, we have so many examples of firefighters and fire communities knowing certain things in, the knowledge of it, but just the application of it has never been there. And Swedish, fire service always, go back to the Ford. It's always done door control, for instance, like closing the door behind the firefighter. It's been there like 40s and 50s or something like that. And then we started getting better education on, like, about fire and so on. And for some reason, for a lot of reasons, there's everything happens for a variety of things. Door control started to go away in the early 2000s and 2000s. And it was forced to be brought back as like an application of the science in 2010, 2015, and so on, 20. So it's sort of like you have these inconsistencies where even the knowledge of basic ideas doesn't really translate into application on the fireground that easy. You have to be very vigilant about, what's the actual outcome of this piece of science or whatever.
it's funny you should say that, because not only do I agree, I think I have a reason. So I would love to get some input from you. You're right. Some of the things that are seen as new or even provocative or controversial, door control, flowing as you move in, hose advancement, flow path, ventilation, all this stuff isn't really new, but it seemed to disappear late 90s, early 2000s. I started to, that's where I came to the fire service. And it was like, well, okay, none of this really makes sense, but I got to do what I'm told to do. But now that I've done my 30 years in the fire service, I can look back, and here's why I think we did what we did, back in those days, is because the gear got so good. Yeah. The gear, the PPE, the SCBAs, thermal imaging, all that got so good that we could take the heat. We could take more heat. We could take it longer. We could get deeper in the fire. We didn't put our citizens first, like, hey, close the door. Hey, spray smoke. Practice moving that hose up and down stairs. That's my theory. And I'm usually right unless you talk to anybody that knows me. So what do you think?
Well, it's one version of
but they're probably the best version, you would agree.
Yeah, it's probably the best. No, and of course, yeah, but of course, I think that's definitely one part of the puzzle. I mean, it is, and to be fair, I mean, I wouldn't agree with using statement. We put ourselves first by the before the victims on. I think that was just unintentionally, like, we didn't. You sort of, when you went in with your gear, it's not to go like, oh, holy crap, my gear is good. You were just going in and you didn't feel it, so you weren't necessarily having in the back of your head, oh, how about the victim? So that part was unintentional. I would think, I hope anyway. But the fact of course is going to affect our outcome. It's just like any other, unintentional consequences of doing something you feel is good. Like we started live fire training in props. What's the intention that you create, a lot of training scars, because the environment doesn't match reality? So no, of course not. It was good intentions, but you just have to be very cautious about everything is a trade-off. If I do this, what's the outcome? It's not easy to see a lot of times. So yeah, better gear is good. Might be one of the things that led us to going in, not cooling as much as we did. We should have had done maybe. Our intention was not create water damage, as this in Sweden was. That was another layer on top of it. We shouldn't we should use little water as possible, because water damages is a big thing. And we want to be professional, so of course water damage is bad in that sense. Was it a thought that, well, might that be bad for a victim? No, I don't think so, because I don't think that was part of the equation that it was bad. I think it was never. It sounds it sounds horrible, but I don't think that was part of the equation. Even I think just we just assume that if we are quick getting to the fire, cool gases a little bit, but little water, that's also good for the victim, and which I don't believe anymore. But so there's probably a plethora of things that led to this happening, but and also change in education. I think in Sweden, we for instance went away from, we focused too much on the why and too little on the how. Sort of, I think that the philosophy was, if you teach a lot of whys, people figure out the how by themselves. Like if we teach them a lot about about fire, they will by themselves judge when you should do door control. Like, because when it's it makes sense or not. But it's, the fire ground is so hectic and complicated. That's a bridge too far to make. Like, we have to make it more simple. So we have to give a lot of the house. Like, you do door control unless you have a better idea. Like, start with door control until you have suppression, of course, and then you open up. But like, do door control until that. That's a good starting point. Now, if you have the mental bandwidth at that point to go, holy crap, it doesn't make sense this time, don't do door control. Good. But the starting point is that. So I think that, I would say the well-intended, but maybe a bridge too far application of focusing on way too much on the why and too little on the how was also part of that equation, at least for the Swedish Fire Service. That's for sure. Part of it definitely gear.
I think it's so funny you say that, because it's literally the opposite where I'm at. It was,
I know. America is different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We're a little different. But is there any Swedish flags on the moon? Yeah. I didn't think so. America. Woohoo. No.
Yeah.
So
allegedly, Jake.
Allegedly, yeah, allegedly. You're right. Okay. Point Lars. I'll give you that one. So in the fire service, when I came in, it was very militaristic, right? So you're told to do stuff. You're told to be quiet. You're told to just clean the shitters, wipe the floor. You got 30 years to learn this job, blah, blah, blah. And there was never any why. And you weren't really given a voice to ask the why. So I've seen a big shift in the American Fire Service. And a lot of people I talk to, a lot of the really good, like fire nerds, right?
Yeah.
We try to give the why.
For sure.
But for me personally, I can only speak for myself on this one. The reason a lot of times I didn't give the why, I don't think I knew. And I don't think my ego would let me just say, you know what? I don't know. So I was that guy for a while as a training officer. Just do it because I told you to. But if I had to be honest, it was because I didn't know. I was, had a super big ego about that stuff. But once I let that go, then I started to develop all my training starting with the why. The how, it's funny you bring that up, because it seems like, at least it used to be, hopefully it's getting a little bit tighter instead of broader, but the how. It seemed like everybody had a how, and everybody's how was accepted. Well, this is how I do it, and I've always done it this way. And for me, there's a lot of room for hows, but there's not an endless amount. And an example I always like to use is healing a ladder from underneath. That's how we were taught. And that was the one how you could use until somebody got, clubbed in the head with an axe that dropped. And then they're like, hey, wait a minute. What if we heal outside where we can see things and still, that's a different how. Yeah. So that's been at least my experience in the fire service. But with the UL studies, NIST studies, FSRI studies, has it been more embraced where you're from? Or do you think it's been more embraced over in the United States?
I don't know. Hard question.
Look, I'm a hard interviewer, bro. That's what I do.
Yeah. From my point of view, knowing everyone everywhere, I would say Well, first, I want to mention before I get to the UL, but of course, the why is important, like UL. It's sort of like knowledge. Of course, it's important. I go like, to me, it's like you have to find the balance. Like too much why and know how, then you're left with basically scientists don't know what to do because there's not enough time to just figure it out on the fire ground. Like you have to have like somewhere to start. Like too much, of course, how. Nobody has any ability to second guess anything because you don't know anything to second guess a how. Like there's if that doesn't work, I have no plan B because I don't know anything. Like and when you go back and you say that, for instance, so you say, well, I have big ego and I didn't say why. I think it's much simpler than that. I think it might have something to do with ego in some cases, but I think a lot of times it's just all those you don't know what you don't know. Like I'm not going to second guess myself until I start to doubt it. Like before I start to doubt it, I am of course confident in everything I do. It's impossible to walk around being like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll just keep doing it. Like it's very hard. So I think the humility comes from sort of going like the only thing you have, the thing I have to do is constantly pry on things I do think I know, because that's the only thing to start questioning. Like, is it really that way? And that's why it's so hard to change anything, because you have to actively find things that you think you have to actively find things that are the whole to see if they're really broken and you don't know it. What the UL did for me, UL, if I look at me and symbolize me as the nerds, first up, what it did for me was it's just the first, like when it started to come out, was you just give me ammunition for everything I was already doing. The first studies to me wasn't anything universal, because they were basically saying, like, oh, maybe you shouldn't open every door everywhere. And that's, sort of, if you go outside America, that was pretty obvious. Now, for Americans, that like the anti-ventilation, that don't vent before the fire and so on, that was sort of boom for a lot of American fire services. So that didn't change anything. What it did, it gave me like excellent training content, like the videos and data, you could drafts and show everything. It was just amazing from that perspective. So I don't think that they did anything besides fueling the ego of the European fire service. That look at dumb Americans, they don't know when to open a window. So the first studies, I don't think, like, besides the nerds who always find the small details where you of course learn stuff, like because it was basically the first really big study that was look at the whole picture. Like, actually, because much of the science before that was like individual rooms, maybe doing room fires. It wasn't like houses and so on, and it wasn't really tied to firefighter intervention. It was more like, oh, just look at the fire behavior, just look at a single tool maybe, and so on. So it was limited, and we're very siloed, I would say, before what UL did. That is one thing they really hammered home, that they took it and brought it together. But when I remember myself, the first time I was where they went to the transitional study, that's where the first time I go like, holy crap, this changes everything. But I didn't realize it then. Like, of course, the transitional study was, I think, an eye opener for many that, oh, this is a tool to use. So I'm going to, some think it's a useless tool, something is a tool. But okay, it's a tool that, it works that way, at least, we start understanding it. And for me and for many in the European fire service, you could be super general. Europe has much more differences than internally in America. So it's hard to say Europe like Europe, but right. Let's have the broad strokes of, everything. That's where it made change. But it was, for me, was like, oh, I have to teach. We have to, of course, incorporate that into training to do exterior attacks, when to do it, how to do it, and so on. That was, that really, because it wasn't taught. It wasn't prohibited. We have the same story as everyone else. Don't put water in from the outside, you're going to burn firefighters. That exists in every country. Mm-hmm. Of course, then if it's a valid, but of course, we didn't understand why it was. We just, go like, you don't put water in from the outside. So it was half prohibited, if you wanted that, when firefighters inside. But then you go like, oh, but if you do it correctly, it's not a problem. Of course, before firefighters inside and the victims and everything. So we started teaching that. So that was a big, like, practical outcome of just doing that. But then, of course, and it took me probably years. I don't know. But then it started going like, but if it works from the outside with a straight stream, why doesn't it work from the inside? Because I was still operating under the impression that straight streams from the inside, that's useless. It's
Right.
not, it's, and the only reason, the Americans using it because they don't understand anything about fire, anything at all.
Now, hold on. Screeching eagle sound, gunfire, fireworks, America. Now, go ahead. I'm just kidding.
No, but that is, I remember my first trip, I went around America for a month, and I met a lot of fire nerds. And the one thing that struck me, and I wish I could have done that again with what I know now. Like there was so much. I would be a much more humble person if I went around then. I was much more sure of myself when I went around that time. But anyway, one thing that was true, and was undoubtedly true, that the average firefighter in America had zero idea how fire worked. Absolute zero.
Absolutely.
Idea. It was just magic. It was just magic. Something happens. Everything based on that was reactive. So when someone told me, "Oh, straight streams are the best thing," they go like, "But everything you say makes no sense. Everything you say about fire, how water works, is just made up. It was, and I'm just joking. It was fairy tales.
Yeah.
It was just people just making stuff up. And it was mind-blowing. And that was, of course, part of my goal. Like, okay, why should I believe the American Fire Service and their experience on straight streams? Because none of what the things they say makes any sense. So I remember talking to a guy who was, and he was a great guy, but he was sort of an expert on, I'm not going to say what an expert was, because he might be sad if I tell him this. I don't know. He was an expert in something about firefighting, and he was telling me about how his experience with about fires. And go like, oh, there's this compression, and when this compression comes in, the fire sort of is pushed together into smaller flames, and this compression. And he was just describing a ventilation control fire. But
it sounds like he was trying to use high pressure.
Yeah, but he had no idea.
But that's heat.
Yeah, but he has no idea. Like oxygen to a fire, and it grows, heat release rate. None of these words were like he didn't have any vocabulary to describe what his experience was. So he's trying.
I can't wait to talk about heat release rate. Heat flux. I'm really excited. I am. I love this shit because I'm with you. With you. It's like in the American Fire Service, we were speaking another language phonetically. We didn't know how to speak Italian. We knew how to say, "Where's the bathroom?" and order a Big Mac. But now, thanks to UL, NIST, FSRI, we're learning to speak that language fluently. But we're still early on. But going back to what you were saying, so you got a guy sitting there telling you, yes, you increase the pressure in the room. Obviously, the fire's going to go out. Okay, let's stay with that, even though we disagree with it.
But he was trying to describe his experience of, if I don't open it up, it's sort of this less fire. But he couldn't explain it. Like he couldn't.
Yes.
Like it was something, and he thought of pressure. It was like coming down, and there's this. But because he was also experienced like what I think is like the muffled sound of high soot concentration. Like if you go into like a bad fire, like sounds become like a bit muffled. Because of course air doesn't travel as easily in the room. So, and when the fire goes down in intensity, the sparks go down, everything becomes sort of quiet. Like if you're in a really bad fire, but he just trying to explain it. I was sitting there going like, because I was so blown away that this is an expert. This is the best one they could find to do, because it was a teacher, so he was teaching other firefighters. This was the best they found on this. This is the height, and again, and that of course changed. That of course, was when I was taught, which was equally ignorant, that straight streams through the ceiling doesn't do anything. It hits the ceiling, It bounces off the ceiling, creates large droplets, falls down, doesn't cool gases, at least not efficiently, but it was basically said it doesn't cool at all. And you just get a wet floor and water running out of the building. And they point to American videos. Look, water running out of the building, idiots. And I bought into that, of course, because I didn't have any reason to doubt it, because I thought my superior understanding of how water works and fire works, at least what I thought I had, I had, but it was incomplete, I would say. But compared to that one, I go like, yeah, of course my world is the right one. So when I started to question my worldview with transition attack, going like, but why? Because I didn't ask how. I didn't ask why does straight streams work from the inside. I asked, how come does it work from the outside with transitional attack to cool the gases and suppress the fire? How come it doesn't work on the inside? Like, I was still in the frame set that it can't work on the inside. It's like useless on the inside, but for some reason it works on the outside.
Right.
Which of course doesn't make any sense. And it, like overcoming that switch in your head where you go like, but it has to work on the inside. If it works from the outside, there's no difference. I can't figure it out. And I started making connection with, of course, people started showing me videos of thermal imagers, and I go like, well, holy crap, that works. Like, it obviously cools gases. Now, I was still convinced that it was inefficient and doing the same thing at, for instance, like doing, fog in Kosovo. But I go like, okay, I'll give them that. It works, but it's still inefficient. And like it doesn't make any sense for that reason. But going back to, I think that knowing the why is, of course, a tremendous benefit if you're going to talk about something. When you talk about vocabulary, I could not talk about anything with those firefighters I met that made sense, because we could talk about our experiences, but it would be a pissing context about who was right, because you have 10 years and I have 20 years, so then 20 years beats 10 years and my opinion's right, like, because there was no vocabulary to like describe, okay, but you make sense and I don't, because you're talking about compression, I'm talking about heat release rate, I don't understand you. Like, we are literally talking different languages. So it was hard. It was the why is so important, that it just allows people to discuss and make sense of their experiences from that matter. Also, like now, and to me, it was the same. The more I learned, the more I went back into my memory and go like, that's why it happened. That fire. Like now it makes sense. Like,
yeah.
And it just, and the thing is, a lot of those fires, I go like, oh, that's why. That was fire. Went home and go like that. Oh, that was a great fire. That was, we did an excellent job. Like 5 years later, I go like, holy crap, we sucked at that fire. I just realized that that was a horrible fire, but I didn't realize. It took me 5 years of processing to get to that point. So the why is tremendous. And also, of course, as an instructor, if you don't know the why as an instructor, how can you design efficient house to teach?
Yes.
Like now you're just replicating what someone else did, but so of course the why is like incredibly, like if you're like, lack of a better word, influencer, which all the fire instructors are, you influence your department, your crew, your country, whatever it might be. If you're an influencer, you have to make sure that, okay, am I basing my house on something that seems sound? Good theory always comes first. Like, you have to start there. So I want to emphasize that I think why is super important, but it is a balance. You have to teach hows to. You can't do one without the other. It doesn't work.
No, you're exactly right. And I'm not saying it's the exact combination for everybody. Everybody has a different learning style. They have a different learning rate. But
every topic is different. Like healing
Yes.
a ladder, you might not need a lot of whys on learning. Should you heal it from the front or the back? You just need a how, because there's not very flexibility. But if you're talking, like when to do door control or not, sure, you can do it with a how. Just do door control. But like the amount of efficiency you can gain by doing it more, having options, is tremendously important. So it depends on the topic too. Some topics you need a lot of whys to be efficient. Some topics you can just go with a how, if it's a good how.
But to get any further with this, we all have to be on the same page. So when it comes back to speaking the same language, talking about the horrible T word, transitional, that got such a bad rap in the United States. And it shouldn't have. It shouldn't have at all. But some people will read 2 or 3 lines, they'll inject their ego, and then they'll go hit it hard from the yard. That's bullshit firefighting. But here's a bottom line: exterior to interior is the way to save people's lives. It's a way to cool temperatures, ceiling temperatures, floor temperatures, and it makes sense if you explain it. Like, here's how I explain it to some people: if done correctly, steady, straight, and steep, and then hopefully it's acting like a sprinkler if there's a ceiling there. But I try to explain to people, you don't want to hit it from the outside. You want to go through the door. Fine. But let me ask you this. Now you're pushing a hallway and the first room on your right is blowing out fire. You go past that. Don't put it out. Then you're going to go to the next room that's on fire and put it out first. People look at me like I'm an idiot. They're like, why in the world would you do that? You wouldn't pass fire. And I'm like, exactly. And you don't pass it from the outside in either. There's a way to put water in there. You're not going to steam anybody. I mean, if you don't do it, let's just say, now let's flip the coin over and say you're right. You're going to steam the shit out of somebody. Yeah. Okay, let's say you're right. They're wrong, but let's just pretend. Yeah. So is somebody going to be mad because they're steamed in the burn unit with Silvadine, or that they're burned to a crisp in a coffin? So this idea for us, from my experience, it's been ego. They want to get in, they want to get dirty, they want to get hot, they want to melt their helmet. They're putting themselves ahead of little Timmy in a Spider-Man pajamas on the ground. So talking about just transitional or exterior to interior, it's one of the things I'm blessed to teach for the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. And we get a lot of pushback. And then when you show them, hearing it's one thing, hearing it and then doing it is a whole different animal. So throw that out there. Again, talking the same language. And then back in the day, you had one measurement for heat, just one. Yeah. Temperature. That was it. And the most misleading subjective term there can be in the fire service when we're talking about definitions in fire behavior is temperature. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Do you think we just need that one term, temperature? Is that good enough to describe modern furnishings and everything? Are we good with that? Can we say 1,500 degrees? That's enough.
Yeah, if you could do all the local temperatures everywhere. Because if the whole room is 1,500 degrees everywhere, it's a big difference than if the ceiling is 1,500 or the couch or whatever it is. I mean, I think that struck me when I started thinking about sort of, if you start with temperature, like how local temperature is. Like, that's something that really struck me every time, like how extremely local temperature is. Just like one part of the building, one part of the material, you can go in every dimension you want. This part over here, this part over here could be 1,000 degrees, and just 1 meter beside it, it could be 50. Like, temperature is extremely local. So someone goes, oh, that room was 1,500 degrees. Go like, where in that room? Like, was that an average temperature? Did you collect 1,000 samples in there and go do the average temperature in there? Or did you just randomly look with the thermal imager and get like somewhere in there it was 1,500 degrees or whatever? Like, it's a very crude measurement. And so it doesn't tell you much, first off, if you don't know exactly where you're measuring it. Like, if you look at different studies, how many in the UL studies knows where the thermocouples are positioned? Like, most people wouldn't care or even look at it. Go like, well, it makes a huge deal, of course. That's why they have so many of them. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to measure temperature at different positions, and they pick sort of some of them to present on their like their presentations, because that's sort of some of the nice conclusions and like visualize them. But if you look at all of them, you get a different picture, and you can't present all those pictures. So the localness of temperature is a huge one. But of course, as we know, it doesn't convey anything. You can have something super hot, like candle. It's not going to burn you to death. unless you allow it for a really long time.
That's a lot of tolerating.
If you put it in your eye for a very long time, maybe it'll burn a hole into your brain and kill you. I don't know. Don't try that at home, boys and girls. But so we have this concept of course, heat release rate, where it's not really about, if temperature is a problem, too high temperature, you still have to say a problem where. Like if you look at the face piece of a firefighter, I read a lot of about in American PDFs, it's all about the face piece is the weakest part, and because it's only rated for this amount of temperature and so on. I go like, well, sure, that's the exact temperature of when the glass starts to degrade and melt, so it's polycarbonate, plastic. Yeah, but that doesn't. If you look at firefighters being killed, most of the firefighters being injured, sort of, and they have air in their bottle, their face peak is never broken. Rarely, they have burns to the shoulders and stomach and hands and everything, but their face is fine because they have air in their bottle, and they're breathing. The face peak is only failing, or most of the time only failing, if you stop breathing, because you're starting to now you don't have that airstream going over your face that's constantly cooling the plastic. And temperature, I think that's a good thing. I mean, a lot of times we talk about temperature. I'd use that example. Like temperature is the actual temperature in that case of the plastic. It melts at 107 degrees. But temperature is a result of energy moved into that plastic and removed from that plastic. If you're removing the energy faster from the plastic carb, if you're breathing, if you're in a high heat environment, you start to breathe faster, your face peak is going to cool off faster because you have more air going through and you're cooling it down faster because you're removing as much energy as possible. So if you're removing it faster, then you're supplying more energy from the fire, radiant heat, temperature goes down. If you stop breathing and you're exposing it to more heat, temperature goes up and eventually it will fail. So breathe a lot if it's hot. I don't know if that's how.
I'll tell you what, let me put a pin in that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for today. Okay. So I want to thank you for being on today. You're coming back next Monday on 3-Point Firefighter. And I want everybody to tune in and listen because we're about to get into some good deep stuff that I think every firefighter needs to know. And if you're a fire instructor, you definitely need to know. Okay. Brother Axelsson, thank you for being on the show, and I'll see you next week.
Cool.
And that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So we were talking about heat release rate. We were talking about temperature, and we're talking about the mask. Specifically with air movement in the mask, it does remove a lot of the heat. But let's step backwards a little bit before going any further with that one. One of the things that I think a lot of firefighters understand is the different modes of energy, of energy transmission, right? So, talking about radiation, convection, conduction. So if you're in a room, you've got your mask on, super hot, and maybe you're not crawling, you're standing up, it's taking a lot more energy. But you have to keep in mind, people want to, when they talk about the three main types of energy release, rarely do they take an effect that you're going to have, in a lot of cases, all three at once. You're not going to have just one. And a good example of that is if you take a hand and put it over a candle, your hand's going to get hot, and that's convective. Okay, it's like hot air. Now you take it to the side, get a little bit closer, that's going to be your radiation. And if you stick your eyeball into the flame, of course, now we're talking about conduction. So it's not unlikely to be in a house fire and to engage in two, if not three of those types of heat release. So I don't have to be near the fire. If I'm looking directly at that fire, say, for example, a training burn, I'm looking at a fire. I may not be near the convected gases. I'm not up there, but I am having the radiation hit my mask and soften my mask. So with that said, now let's move on with your example on these masks giving out. We were talking about temperature.
Yeah. And I think that, convection for me is the main thing, like it is, like radiation is fairly simple and so on. And conduction is fairly simple. And And I can get to those, but if we look at the mask, that's it's a good example of convection. You have a cold airstream going through your face, and that cools the plastic all the time. And you probably have convective gases hitting you if you're in convective flow from the fire, or you have radiation from the fire that keeps heating it up. And that balance, whatever is the greatest, will get the plastic to heat up or cool down. It is like a bathtub. If you put your faucet on and you put the plug on the bathtub, if the faucet is faster than the plug, you'll fill it up. But if the plug is bigger than the faucet, it will go down. That's temperatures. Temperature is the end result. I say that what drives temperature is heat release rate. It's the energy being transferred to it. Like and heat release rate could be negative, meaning if you look at it, you could have negative energy and positive energy. It's just the rate of thing happening. In that sense, heat being transferred. Now, cooling is the opposite, of course. That's where you have negative heat release rate in that sense. But it's typically not used that way, but it's sort of the way of thinking about it. It's just a rate of transfer. How much are you producing, or how much are you convecting? So you have this energy being transferred. If you have a big fire and you're sitting, like you say on your candle, if you stand up in the flow coming from the fire, you're not only getting radiation from the smoke, radiation from the surfaces, maybe radiation from the fire. You're also getting hit by that convective airstream. And just take the candle example. Like, where do you want to be? You don't want to be above the candle. That sucks. Like, it's not even close. Like, it's such a massive difference. Above the candle, you have to be, I don't know, in American, 1 feet, 1 hand, 1 feet. I don't know. You have the weirdest stuff to measure things. But you use
eagle screeching sound, gunshots, fireworks. Just saying, just America.
Yeah, no, but so you have to be, I know, 5 inches away. But to the side of the candle where you have the same heat release being produced, you can have your hand like literally like this close, and it won't hurt. Mm-hmm. It's such a massive difference. And understanding that, of course, that is, you don't want to be in the outflow, because the amount of energy is going to hit you is tremendously much bigger. So you have the convective heat flow coming, you have the radiation, maybe a conduction, of course. When the convective heat hits your mask, it conducts the energy through your mask. So conduction is always present. Like if you're standing in the airstream and that heat hits your PPE, your body trying to cool it conducts through the PPE. You're always having, of course, everything happening. And if you're sitting on the floor is heating you up if it's preheated and so on. But the massive one is really the convective energy. Because if you're sitting, on a training burn, sure, you can sit close to the fire and look at it, and radiation might be an issue. And you start to get damaging gear and anything, you're sitting there rolling fire over your head. But if you're doing that on a real fire, you're probably doing something wrong. Like I know that some people are searching ahead of the hose line, and that's a sort of different thing, because you might end up in sort of that scenario where you have a tremendous amount of heat, but you don't have any way to address it. But if you have a nozzle in your hand, or you're searching behind the hose line, you shouldn't just look at the pretty things. You should address it. But you will still be in the convective airstream coming, not only from now fire gases heated up, you're going to have the steam also. Because you also know that we use terms like, we're going to cool the fire. Okay, so the fire gets colder. Where did the energy go? Like, it went into the water. It went into the walls. It went something. It didn't magically go away. So in temperature-wise, we cooled the fire compartment. We didn't take the energy out of it. I think that you have to really, the energy is still there. It's just moved into the steam. It moved into the hotter water. It moved into the gases flowing outside. Like, it moved somewhere. Now, if you're sitting in the fire compartment and you're sitting in the outlet, there's no window open, and you start suppressing it, and you suppress it with, let's say a low amount of water, so that a lot of things turn to steam. Let's simplify. A lot of things turn to steam. Then that steam, of course, is not going to just stay there. It's going to flow out, and you're sitting in the steam, and that's going to go, ooh, and it's going to, because all that energy in that fire is going to go towards you, and it's going to, when it hits you, it condensates back into liquid, and then the energy is supplied to you. You're absorbing that energy. So you don't want to be there. If you use a lot of water now, you can maybe minimize the amount of water turning to steam, and you reduce that problem, which is one of the reasons you want to use copious amount of water, as some would say.
Yes.
So, but you have that. So you want to, of course, avoid convective and conductive and all the amount of heat. But the main thing is to understand. And also, one more thing. Oh, there's so many things. But the same goes for heat release rate. It bugs the shit out of me because there's a misconception about heat release rate because we simplify. So if you take a study from the UL and you read somewhere, this fire was 3 megawatts. It's a number, but whatever. 3 megawatts, 5 megawatts, whatever it might be. Okay, so how is that measured? Okay, it's measured by looking at how much oxygen was consumed. If we know how much oxygen was consumed, which is the basic measure on the funnel above the fire, they suck everything out, and they look for how much oxygen is missing. It should be 21%, but it's not. If we calculate with how much volume and how much air we've sucked in, how much oxygen is missing, we know how much oxygen was consumed. And if we know how much oxygen was consumed, we extrapolate that towards how much energy was created. Mm-hmm. So you look at, it's burning over here. It takes 30 seconds for the energy to go up to the funnel, or for the smoke to go up to the funnel. We know that we're missing that much energy. So 30 seconds ago, we were burning at 1.5 megawatts or whatever it might be.
Right.
Okay, so that's okay. So then the scientists know, okay, that's a 1.5 megawatt fire. Okay, so where did that energy go? Because nobody was suppressing it. It was absorbed by the house, because when the smoke came out of the house, it wasn't very hot anymore. So the most, that 1.5 megawatts of energy, let's say, okay, in the early burn, up at some stage, probably 1.4 of that was absorbed by the house. So the temperature of the walls got hotter. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say if you're a firefighter going into that hallway, not that first, you 1.5 megawatt fire in there, let's say, measured by scientists. If you're standing in a hallway, let's say maybe 0.1 megawatt, 100 kilowatts of energy is actually in the hallway where you are. Mm-hmm. So when people say, there's a 1.5 megawatt fire, I need to have at least 1.5 megawatts of cooling capacity in my hose line to suppress it. Like, no, that's not true at all. It doesn't make any sense. In that case, you need 100 kilowatts of cooling capacity if you want to match the fire. I'm not saying you should match the fire. You should you should dominate the fire. Use whatever American. You should attack and kill the fire with flags.
We shoot it with guns.
Yes, yes. Engage the fire in very militarized ways. So maybe it's 100 kilowatts, and if you go in the hallway, maybe it's 200 kilowatts left, and in the fire room, maybe it's just 0.5 kilowatts left. Power is only also relevant to go where is that fire? Because you look at it, and another example, when the fires then start to progress because ventilation control in that room, mm-hmm. maybe a lot of the flames is now happening in the hallway because the room itself is maybe just black because there's no oxygen coming in that way. It's coming through the hallway. That's where you have the flame. So now we have, let's say, 2 megawatts in the hallway. Maybe you only have 1 megawatt in the actual fire compartment. So the fire compartment is producing less energy than the hallway. We have a localized production of heat, which is also why if I try to teach someone, why do you use a fog nail, like a piercing nozzle, the small ones, that the playground things for you. It only flows 15 gallons per minute. And I go you don't need more. Because one thing I hate about the Americans being experientially right about using a lot of water is that now you disregard anything with little water. I'm saying you as an American fire service in general. Because we need a precedent with 1 million liters of water, so otherwise it's useless. No. Because if you put that fog nail into the fire compartment behind the hallway, you suppress it with 1 liter per minute. It's not a problem. It's just a matter of time, because it will displace the oxygen, and then there's no energy being produced. Now, I'm not saying that's good, because you still have hot materials, but where the energy is produced makes a huge impact on understanding what our options and our tools do.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit for those that are listening and they're a little confused what we're talking about. I want to, and please, Lars, tell me when I'm wrong. So we start talking about temperature,
Most of
and
the
how
time?
temperature is inaccurate, or if anything, would be a starting point. But there's
for
so
sure.
much more information that we as firefighters need to know. So one of the things I hear a lot is fires today, and this is, I'm talking to the audience here. You hear fires today are burning hotter, and that's just not true. We talked about a candle earlier. So one candle, the flame of that one little tiny candle can be up to, generally speaking, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So now people are like, there's no way, but yes, it is. Now you have another candle, that exact same candle, that is also 1,500. You put them both together, you still only have 1,500 degrees temperature Fahrenheit. But what has changed is that one candle puts out energy in watts. So one candle is, I believe, like 60 watts of energy. So if I have two candles and they're both burning 1,500 degrees each, little tiny candles, and I stick them together, the temperature doesn't go up, but the energy doubles. It becomes 120 watts. So one of the things that we're talking about is heat release rate, and we were talking about the different wattages. Like he brought up 3 megawatts. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lars, like one good chair, new modern chair, is like 2.5 megawatts of energy. That's just potential energy that if that chair was to be set on fire, it could release up to 2.5 megawatts of energy. That's a lot of energy. A room can flash on 2.5 megawatts of energy. But here's where it gets a little different. Now, Lars, am I right so far? Am I good to keep going on?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, correct. I don't want to give the wrong
Yeah.
information.
No. It's good. It's good.
Okay, so now we're going to take that same 2.5 megawatt chair that could flash a room. Now it's in my bedroom, a 12 by 12 bedroom, 8 feet tall. Yes, that chair, if it's set on fire in my bedroom, it's going to burn. The different types of heat energy is going to take place. Everything's going to catch fire in that room. It's going to be exponential, and it's going to flash. So another thing to take away from this, it's not the chair we're talking about, more or less. The chair is definitely a big part of it, but it's the box the chair is in. I take that same exact chair, I put it in the middle of an open warehouse, a huge warehouse. I set it on fire. Is the warehouse going to flash? Absolutely not, because that energy that he's talking about is being distributed through a much larger area. High pressure or heat is always looking for low pressure or cooler air. It's a homeostasis. It's what it wants to be. Fire wants to make everything the same temperature. So it is spreading out in the warehouse, and in doing so, it's cooling. Eventually that fire will go out, whether it's more than likely it's going to be a fuel limited fire, meaning it's going to burn down, and that's going to be it. I believe that's what we were talking about, Lars. Am I good? Did I miss something? Do you think that's a pretty fair description?
Yeah. Well, technically, it's the cold air that wants to push the fire out. But that's a different. Could be different. We could talk about pressures, but the fire doesn't want to go anyway. It's being pushed out by the cold air.
But doesn't high pressure heat wants to expand?
Pressure is not important.
Really?
Not
I'm interested.
Not in that
I'm
sense.
interested. I would love to hear this.
Well, you just look at this. If you have a hot smoke layer, and you would say that it's hot, it's not a lot of pressure, and you have a cold something down here, and it has low pressure because it's cold. Why doesn't the hot? Why doesn't it just go down to the floor?
It does eventually.
Yeah. But only when it's the same temperature.
When it fills the box, it has no place to go. Oh, I see what you're saying. The cold pressure is not drawing it down. It's the actual structure bringing it down.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
You're just filling up a box, and then eventually the box gets full, and then it goes down. But it doesn't. A lot of books tell there's a high pressure in top of the fire compartment. It's low pressure down here. No, that's not true at all. if that was the case, high pressure would go to low pressure, because that's true. Because the high pressure here would just go boom down to the floor, but it doesn't. That's not about pressure. Everything is about gravity. You have light air and heavy air. So, but cold air is about 1.3 kilos per square meter, cubic meter or something. So it's a certain amount of weight to it. Cold air. When it gets heated, of course, it gets lighter. Well, that's what happens. And light air does not rise. That's the wrong word technically. Light air gets pushed up by heavy air pushing in. It's like having two different liquid, diesel and water. The diesel is lighter, so it will flow up, and the water will settle below it unless you have mixing. So you would have, it's the same thing in a fire compartment. You have the hot air doesn't rise; it's being pushed up by heavy air. So when you have what you have in a fire compartment is gravity. You have lighter stuff on top, and that happens to be steam and hot stuff, which is lighter than air and normal ambient air. So yeah, you just have gravity. Now, where does pressure come into play? Pressure comes into play is when temperature changes. So if you look at it, when does pressure play a part? And let's get to ventilation later. This is about pressure, but most about gravity. If you have cold air in a room and you start heat that's an air pump, because you're creating light air. And when light air, it doesn't sit here, it gets pushed in. The heavy air gets pushed in, which feeds the fire. It's just physics. It feeds the fire, and the air gets pushed up. Now you have an air pump. It's just gravity. Okay. It's the same as you're outside. Why is the cold air high up by the airplanes? Because it's lighter. No, that's not. That's a different example. Bad example. So you have gravity it's just gravity stream. So let
me interrupt real quick, because you brought up the airplane thing. I think this might illustrate the point. By accident. So planes will conserve more energy the higher they fly, because it's colder air, it's thicker, it's heavier, so it holds it. And so in wintertime, planes use less fuel because of the cold air. Does that seem right?
No, well, the engines are more efficient because it's colder, but that's not. This is just it doesn't matter. That's because the air is thinner, because their air resistance is lower. It's less because it's about pressure, because air has a weight. Okay. So in the bottom, the air is pushed up by everything. At sea level, there's a shitload of air pushing it to it, so it has a higher pressure. It's denser. Okay. But the higher up you go, there's less stuff pushing it down, so it becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. And when you go up to the airplanes, the air is so thin. That's why it's hard to breathe, because the ratio of oxygen is the same. It's 21% oxygen, but the total amount of oxygen molecules per cubic meter is so low. So you still have 21% oxygen, but the total amount you're getting into you when you suck it into your lung is very low. That's why you die on mountains, because the ratio of oxygen is the same. It's 21% oxygen, but the amount of oxygen molecules you suck in with every breath is just very small.
Okay. Interesting. I like that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I like that. That's good.
Yeah. So in the fire compartment, you have cold air coming in, pushing up the lighter air to be up here. And you have gravity, and that's a gravity stream. It's a gravity flow. It's entirely pushed by the only place where and if you think in the fire compartment, you have lots of pressure differentials, because when the cold air gets into the fire, get close to the fire, it starts to expand, and that's a localized increase in pressure. So the most it will expand is from cold air just beside the fire, going to the flame, which is it's way hotter than we measure. So a flame is, if you were to go into the molecule level, it's about probably 3,000 degrees Kelvin or something. That's 2,500 degrees Celsius. It's wicked hot inside. but when we measure it, even if we take a fine measurement, we get an average, and the average is much lower. So when you're inside that molecule level, it's super hot, it expands tremendously. So if let's make an example. Let's say it's 1,000 degrees, or 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever. Let's say I don't remember the numbers. Let's say 0.3 kilos per cubic meter of air. Let's say it's 4 times lighter when it gets into the air. That's where the pressure went from. That's where you have the pressure expansion. When temperature goes up, where you are measuring, pressure goes up because things are expanding. When temperature goes down, it's like, imagine have your air piece that we're measuring here. That's at the end of the flame. As soon as you go up to the ceiling, when it's just hot smoke, let's say it's 1,000 degrees there because it's colder. That's where you have contraction and you have pressure going down. So you would have the higher pressure into the fire where you have all the expansion. You would have lower pressure locally above the fire where air starts to contract again. But that's local, and we don't measure local because we can't measure local pressure differences. So if you go into a study where you measure pressure, it's at the differential where the door is. So you're measuring the difference between the outside of the compartment and the inside of the compartment at some height. And that's where the pluses and the minuses and the books come from. For if you measure the door to the fire compartment and you measure on the bottom, you will get typically fire. You will get a negative pressure, and you would at the bottom you get a positive pressure in the door, indicating that this air is going out and this air is going in. It does not indicate the pressures inside the fire compartment. It has nothing to do with that. And it's also, again, if pressure would be, even in that slice, which is the door, would have a massive outcome, the air would just go down to the floor because high pressure goes to low pressure. That is true. But that is taking gravity out of the equation, which is a much bigger force in this case. We need to figure out gravity, density of things, way more than we need to figure out pressures.
So talking about the different pressures and how gravity, it never even occurred to me, and I know you're right about how gravity affects it. But now the thing that if you had a room with no fire, you'll still have different pressures, top and bottom. Right?
No,
so
not really.
You even if you could measure at the low,
it would be so low, it would be ridiculous. But yeah, okay. So
but to illustrate a point,
but
now we throw a fire in there that accelerates it and creates that higher pressure. So this kind of ties right back into a myth the fire service used to have, and I think it's still in the books today, where they said that steam expands 1,700 times, and that's what puts a fire out. But that's not exactly true. It's the contraction of the gases. That 1,700 times comes from a pressure vessel test for a railroad back in the 70s. Somehow it worked its way in the fire service. People were like, well, that's how fires go out. But that's not true at all. It's that pressure differential again. The fire, generally speaking, you put the fire out, you are contracting those gases. So to your point, what's going to replace that area where if I've got this much hot gas and I put water on it and it contracts, there's not a vacuum there. There's not a void there. That's not how energy works. It's replaced by cooler air. Make sense?
Yeah, if the outcome is done, I need to. There's so much things to say about this, but
that's why I want you on here.
So let's start here. 1,700 degrees. Yes. If you let's take in everything out aside. If you take 1 liter of water or 1 gallon of water, and you vaporize it, it will expand 17 times at 100 degrees. 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
And it would keep expanding if you heat it further, up to 3,600 degrees at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever magical number you use. So it expands a lot, yeah. And now, if you're in theory somewhere you're taking that energy to do that vaporization of the water, especially, and then the subsequent heating. If you take that from a smoke layer or basically hot air. Because that's what it is, hot air. If you take it from hot air, we already established hot air is when it expands, heat, it expands. So when you cool the hot air, if you do the math on it and you do experiments, you will get a much bigger contraction than you get expansion. So The net outcome is, yes, you will get less smoke in there. Now, that is only true if you don't have any vaporization coming from any other things in the room. Because if you're vaporizing something on a wall that takes the energy from the wall does not contract, but the expansion still happens. So if you want to create as much steam as you want, as possible, you want to hit hot surfaces with not as much water, so that you turn as little water. There's another word. not too much water, because if you hit too much water, it will not vaporize the steam. But you don't want too little water, because you want steam production. If you hit it exactly right, you have a steam generator. The wall keeps hot and generates more steam, and you get steam. But you get no contraction, because the wall does not contract, because it's about where the energy is taken from. So there is this balance. If you vaporize, if you have three gallons of water, if you vaporize 1 gallon in the smoke, and you vaporize 2 gallons on a surface or something that can't contract, you get a net zero effect.
Yeah. Okay.
But
I get that.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads right into water mapping. So talk about the water mapping studies. By the way you apply water makes a huge difference in that contraction, in covering and coating the box, and breaking up those drops to get on top of the fire. So spraying through a fire does no good. Spraying on the bottom normally isn't as effective, especially if you're throwing water in rooms before you get there, literally water mapping through a building. So if you're hitting that center of that room with a steep, steady, straight angle, it is going to coat the walls. It's going to throw water on the fuel in the middle and contract those gases. And again, when gases contract, there's not a vacuum. There's not an empty hole. It has to be replaced. So if you're contracting hot gases consistently, I'm not just saying a blast and that's it. I'm saying putting out the fire. Yeah. It will be replaced by the cooler gases. Oh, whenever anything hot and cool get together, they tend to through homeostasis become slowly or fast, depending on what we're talking about, become the same temperature. So we can, where the pressure, let me go back to what I was talking about, the room with different pressures, no fire. Now we added fire. So now the pressures are different. Now we are consistently putting water on the fire in a correct and proper way. And we are accelerating what it wants to do anyway. It wants everything to be the same temperature. That's basically what it is. Yeah. And in knowing how to put the right water there, knowing that there is a preference. Now, I never, ever considered gravity. I cannot wait to even study this some more. Everything for me has been pressure. High pressure goes to low pressure. Hot goes to cold. If I was to go outside in a very cold day and sit on a rock completely naked, except maybe a clown wig and nipple clamps. But let's say I go out there and I sit completely naked on a rock. Okay. My body, my heat from my body is going into the rock. The rock's not saying, hey, give me all your heat. It's my body saying, hey, here's heat. I'm going from hot to cold. Then eventually my nipple clamps and my clown wig, if I stay out there long enough, are going to be the same temperature.
Yeah, your body will try to produce more heat to compensate for it, but it can only survive for so long. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Now, I think it is important that and I see that a lot of YouTube videos, it's very hard to know what contraction is and what mechanical forces is. So if you take a straight stream, put it to the ceiling, it hits the ceiling and you have water droplets moving forward. That creates a tremendous amount of mechanical forces. Mm-hmm. It will push things forward. Now, some people go, "Oh, look at that! That's cooling." You're doing that into a room, and you see everything being pushed. It's not really. I don't really know if that's cool, if that's contraction, or if it's contraction and mechanical forces pushing it away, and so on. It's very hard to know what's happening. It's not possible a lot of times to measure it. You just have to go like. We know contraction happens if you cool the gases. Absolutely. We know the expansion happens if you cool the surfaces. We know that steam expands. If you're flowing a shit ton of water over the surfaces, you're probably minimizing the amount of water steam created, which maximizes the cooling. which maximizes the contraction of gases. If you're doing improper, which is what most firefighters in Europe do, improper fog cooling, you're probably getting a shitload of water on the surfaces, but not enough to really prevent a lot of production of steam, but also cooling the gases. Now, if you continue to do that, you will constantly condense the steam that you're producing. If you're constantly you're condensing the steam that you're producing, which will contract again. And so you can mitigate sort of the symptom of the problem going forward, which makes it also partially why it works. Europe wouldn't do it unless it didn't work. I'm not saying it's optimal. I'm just saying it sort of works. But you would have to constantly keep reapplying, which we see on studies also, because you have that constant expansion of the steam, and you need to contract the steam again to prevent that problem. So it's very hard to know what is pressure and what is mechanical forces causing pressures, but it's a sort of different thing. But I want to go back to steam. It was, you said something about that I wanted to cover before, about pressures in the room. Damn it. No, I forgot it. Sorry. It was something I wanted to touch on.
I feel like for me, my personal insight into fire behavior is understanding a pressure event. If I understand that, I feel like that I can understand putting the fire in a bag, where it's been, where it's at, where it's going, because that's what that hot heated gases want. It wants to go as high up as it can. It'll do everything it can to do that. But then we build all these boxes. It has to navigate to the best place for it to go out. Now, we talked about temperature. We talked a little bit about heat release rate, which is the amount of heat released over a period of time. Some things release a lot of heat quickly. Some things release heat slowly. Is that a good high-level definition?
Yeah, I mean, because when I started going around America, there was this talk about joules all the time. This is how many joules some things are. This sofa is so many joules. Joules is, when we talk about fuel is a hard word, because fuel means so many different things. It's a very undefined term. So if I say fuel, someone would say, oh, a sofa is fuel, which it is. I mean, it has potential to release energy if we let it, or if it happens, if it oxidizes if it's get oxidized with oxygen, it will release energy. So in that case, it's potential fuel. And I think that's a very good word. It is potential fuel. And you have joules, and those joules, if you put it out in the ground, if you bury your sofa, it will decompose. Decompose is oxidation, but it's just slow. Decomposing is fire, but it is slow. It releases heat. You can have if you have a big pile of organic materials and it's very, tight and it's heavy, you will get smoldering fires in the bottom, because the decomposition process goes fast enough to become what we call fire. It's the same thing. It's just a matter of speed. So how quickly you release those joules is, of course, the main issue. The degrading sofa over 10 years in your backyard is not a big problem for us. We don't need gear to handle it, but the sofa is catching on fire and burns really quickly because you've put a fan on it. It's going to be a big problem, maybe. Right. So that's one part, like how exactly you say, how manifest it. And energy is also this. Let's start first. Fuel could mean the sofa. And then we call fuel controlled fire. Okay, what that does mean? Because it would imply that there's not enough fuel, not enough sofas in this room to get it to be ventilation controlled or oxygen limited. But that's not what we say. When we say fuel controlled or fuel limited, we imply the actual fuel being released into something that could burn, meaning the gases. So now we're switching from one definition of the word to another. What we actually mean is the fuel that is actually right now being vaporized. Are we vaporizing enough fuel right now so that we are producing more of that than we have oxygen coming in? Now we're getting into a fuel rich or fuel abundant or oxygen limited or oxygen controlled or ventilation controlled state. That's what we have. So that now we're talking about the actual produced fuel. Now, if we talk about heat release rate, we are talking about the energy that's actually being created at a certain period of time. It's never about how long. A 5 megawatt fire is always a 5 megawatt fire. Taking aside where that 5 megawatts is created, that's a huge thing. We're locally, 1 megawatt over here, 1 megawatt over here. But totally 5 megawatts is the actual energy being increased every second. And that's the thing we have to match. If I simplify, it's not true, but with my cooling capacity. I have to supply 5 kilowatts of cooling capacity to match the 5 kilowatts or 5 megawatts of burning capacity. Now, how many joules that are released is the matter of the total amount of joules over time. That is for a lot of sounds not even important for us. It's just a totally irrelevant term because it doesn't specify the time. If I have my sofa burning over a 10-year period, degrading, it released the same amount of joules as it does in the living room when it's on fire over that period of time. So it's a useless term for firefighters in most sense. Because
which one, joules?
Joules, yeah.
Okay.
Because
we just use it for when we shock the hell out of people.
Yeah. Oh, this is how many joules that is, and that's how many joules that is. Well, it doesn't joules. Go like, yeah. My house is a trillion joules. It's not like I'm burning to death in here. It's just potential if it's being released fast, but it's not right now. It's degrading slowly, and I'm trying my best to keep it from degrading too fast. Joules is megawatts is everything. It's watts is everything. It specifies how much energy it's released right now. That's the thing I'm fighting. Now, temperature is way more important than joules in that sense because we also have to take into account. So you have fire is producing some kind of energy, and that gives you a temperature. Now, temperature goes up if the energy being added in that room. Let's say we take an average temperature of a room. If the energy in that room is being produced faster than it's leaking out through an open door by the building itself cooling it, then temperature goes up. If the average temperature goes up, not in the flame, not over here, the average temperature, which is impossible to measure, but in theory, then pressure goes up, averagely in the room. So we know by looking at pressures, we can know that temperature is going up or down. If temperature is going down, it could be wicked hot in there. It could be 1,500 degrees in there, but you can have a negative pressure in the room because temperature is going down.
Okay.
Averagely. It's just that when temperature averagely is going down, maybe there's local differences. There's high pressure over here, there's low pressure over here, there's light air over here, there's heavy over here, but the average temperature is going down. Now pressure is going down averagely. That still means that we can have smoke coming out of the top of the doorway, and we can have going in, because that's also, we have more coming in than going out. That's negative pressure generally. But then you have to take into account gravity, because gravity surpasses pressure, and that's where you get to go ahead. Your mental model is exactly correct about how the air moves in the building. You just have to flip the building upside down, fill it with water, and you fill it in one room and it will flow. It's the same thing. It flows from one room to another. Just flip it upside down, fill it with water. Now you have your mental model about water being heavier in that case than air. If you just flip it around and go like now, it's the opposite, but it's still the same thing. It's about gravity. That's what makes things move inside the building. It's just rarely pressures. Pressures is, you could overcome some gravity if you have a strong fan that creates pressure. So now you can overcome what gravity wants to do to some extent. But what happens if you put a fan, if you have a closed room, which have a high pressure because temperature is going up, you can put a fan on it, and even though if you put the biggest fan in the world, smoke is going to come out of that fire compartment. It's impossible to keep it in, because of course pressure, you put air in, and the pressure is going to sort of balance it, and then it's just about it, gravity, and gravity it will come out, and so you have to just recalibrate your definition. But again, for me, it was when I saw the picture going like, but if it's high pressure in top of the compartment, it's low pressure down here, that doesn't make any sense, because high pressure would just come down. It doesn't matter because high pressure goes to low pressure, and that doesn't happen. You have the smoke stays up until it's full, and it gets sort of filled all the way down. or it just comes down because the compartment's closed, so you would have recirculation of the coldest. Because what happens, of course, is the smoke starts to cool down. It hits the back wall, and now in the back wall, it would stay there. But some of that smoke will start to become the coldest and heaviest, and it will start to sink down. And now you have that cold smoke now, or colder smoke, will have the same temperature as, of course, the air in the bottom, and will start to come down. The coldest smoke will always start to circulate back to the fire in that case. The coldest, which might be super hot, but it's still the coldest in the room, that start to circulate back into the fire. It just happens so that it brings with it all the smoke that also goes down in temperature.
All right, well, let me throw another one at you. Another term I think we should use. You ready?
Yeah.
Heat flux. Why is heat flux important to a firefighter?
Heat flux is just a measurement how much energy is hitting a surface. So, but
over a period of time, right?
No, heat flux is momentary. So heat flux is a certain amount of energy hitting a surface at a certain amount of time. So if you take a split second, if you were, let's say, the flashover, one of the definitions for flashovers is 10 kilowatts per square meter or whatever it is. So you have a certain amount of energy hitting a surface at a certain rate. It doesn't specify anything how long. So heat flux is, if you're standing at the fire, it says how much energy is hitting you. So it depends on. So heat flux is typically a square. So the bigger you are, the more energy you absorb because the surface is bigger. But every square inch has a certain value. It's just that if you have many square inches, you absorb more energy. For instance, if it's radiation. So heat flux is the outcome of the energy being transferred, and it could be radiative heat flux, it could be convective heat flux, it could be conduction heat flux, convective, radiative, or conductive. It's just a measurement of the amount of energy. It's typically just used, but especially when we talk about radiation and convection, how much energy is actually hitting you at a certain period of time. So if you're looking at, that's why you can have a really high heat flux, but if you just go passing by, let's say there's a fire down the hallway, it's raging, and you're going from one compartment just across the hall to the next one, you're not going to basically absorb any energy because the amount of time you were sitting in the hallway was just limited, even though the radiation convection was tremendous.
So maybe I misspoke. See if this is right. So for me, the understanding is the transfer of energy from hot to cold. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
At a certain speed, maybe. Let me see if I can make this better. I'm walking, my house is set for 68 degrees. Okay. And I'm barefoot and I'm walking through the carpet.
Yeah.
No problem. Then I hit the kitchen where I got tile and now my feet are cold. They weren't cold 2 seconds ago on the carpet, but they're cold on the tile floor, right?
Yeah.
My understanding is because the heat flux is higher on the tile, it's taking that heat from me quicker than the carpet was taking heat from my body. If I step on a piece of metal, does that make sense? Or am I thinking about it all wrong?
I'm trying to think about how heat flux would tie into that. So heat flux is, again, the amount of energy hitting a surface that can be conductive. So if you measure the heat flux in your foot, in that case, you would have a negative heat flux because you're losing energy. So it would be the rate of heating. So the heat flux is, the measurement heat flux is higher negatively at the tile because you're losing energy faster than it is on the carpet. But that's not, so yeah, in that sense, heat flux is higher. The rate of energy being transferred from foot is higher. But that, of course, is more about, the more interesting part of that is, of course, what you would call the conductiveness of the material, the isolation properties of the material. So you could have the carpet and the tile being the same temperature. But the thing is that when you step on the tile, you heat up the surface of the carpet really fast. Mm-hmm. So the carpet is the same. Let's say the carpet is 20 degrees, or what is Fahrenheit in 7 degrees. I have no idea. 50 degrees. I don't know. Normal temperature inside. What's that in Fahrenheit? What's
And
inside
Fahrenheit
your
is about 70.
70? Yeah, let's say the carpet is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but your body is I don't know, 120,
98.6. Yeah.
98, so something like. So let's say 100. So the carpet is 50 and your body is 100. So when your foot steps on the carpet, it heats up the outer layer of the carpet to 100 degrees, and it doesn't feel cold because there's no temperature differential.
Right.
Your body, the carpet, because the carpet is a good insulator in that sense. It doesn't conduct the energy fast away from the foot. So when you step on the tile, when your foot steps on the tile, the surface of the tile is not, the foot tries to heat it, but it conducts the energy further away into the material so fast the body can't heat it. So it feels cold because there's a temperature differential that doesn't go away. There's temperature between, and if there's a temperature differential between you and your tile, it continues to try to heat the tile.
Conduction and insulation, basically.
This conduction. So if you look at different materials, if you have, why does lighter materials burn faster? Like if you take an MDF board and you take a heavy timber contains more energy because it's a thicker. If you look at joules on a MDF board versus a timber, the timber has much more energy in it, much more joules, because it contains more energy. It contains more molecules that could oxidize. But when we put a match to it, or propane burner, what happens with the MDF is that you heat up the surface temperature really fast because it insulates. It doesn't conduct the energy further into material, so the surface material that's heated fast, which means that it will start to off gas. So it will start to burn more easily. But while the lumber, which is just like the tile, it conducts the energy further away into the log, so the surface temperature stays cold and doesn't start to pyrolyze, and you have no fuel to burn.
Right.
So the log is much worse in total. But if you look at the numbers on it, just the joules, it's way worse. But we know the MDF will burn super fast because it's much easier to vaporize into fuel because the insulated materials, which is why if you go to like EPS or like styrofoam plastics, like, because they're very good insulators, which means that the surface temperature is increased really fast, even though you supply the same amount of heat flux. So the heat flux on the plastic will make it burn really fast, but it's gone really fast. The heat flux on the log would take a long time to start to burn, but will burn for a very long time and release over a period of time much more energy. So heat flux, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, but so heat flux is the rate of energy being transferred to a surface at some points, and then you have to define how big of a surface and so on. There's many things, but heat flux is that, and that is important. If you're in practice, it's just if you have a high heat flux, you're going to heat up faster. If you're in that case, we talked about the mask before. The convective cool air is having a heat flux on the plastic of your mask, but it's negative. Mm-hmm. It's a negative heat flux, and the convective air hitting the mask or the radiative energy hitting the mask has a positive heat flux. If the positive heat flux is higher, it's going to increase the temperature of the glass until it melts. If the negative heat flux is higher, it will cool the plastic down and you won't, have a bad day at work.
And nobody wants a bad day at work, right?
Nobody wants a bad day at work. Yeah.
I forget who told me, but they said when you come to work, it's a round trip ticket. I always look at going to work as a round trip ticket. I love that idea.
Yeah, that's
brother.
Awesome.
I've appreciated your time on here. You gave me a lot of extra time. I appreciate that. I cannot tell you, I'm a nerd. I love learning. I've learned a ton today, and I really appreciate it. But we always end 3-Point Firefighter the same way. You gotta let me know what is one of the best firehouse pranks that you've played on somebody or have played on you.
Yeah. I'm not a prankster. I try to have fun, but I'm not a prankster. But so I'll tell you about one that backfired because of who we did it to. But it was very simple. It was a senior officer, and we put his motorcycle on a very like Craigslist, he was on a. It was some kind of, I don't remember exactly. It was some place we couldn't turn the phone off. It was something important. and we put this motorcycle out for auction, for sale at a very cheap price in the newspaper. So he was calling after some time, going like, I can't. Every time I close my phone, someone else ringing like, I want to buy a motorcycle. I want to buy a motorcycle, and I can't get them to stop. And he was crying because he was hours, and he was supposed to get important phone calls and everything. And there was calls after. It didn't end well. Like he did not take it in the spirit of the joke. It was just, but I mean, as a I don't know if a prank is just evil, but it didn't work out really well. So that was it. That to me, it was mostly during, I did military service in a civilian military service at an airport firefighter. Then we were a bunch of 18-year-old dudes living in a barrack and having operational duty as airport firefighters. There was nothing to do. So there was a lot of there was a lot of pranks going there. So to me, it was so they at an airport we had 30 seconds to get from wherever we're going to be in the fire engine with our boots on, ready to leave. So in 30 seconds, the fire truck should leave the engine bay, which of course does not leave a lot of room for anything when the tones drop. And our culture was, when the tones dropped, there was a difference between the action emergence and training, but there was no difference in reaction. Like if you were in the bathroom, there was no time to do any last wipe before you were running. And of course, there was the senior people had the authority to do practice alarms rather than the officers. And for that fire station, the officers left, and there was only us left. And they senior crew, and they of course did training alarms when you're on the bathroom, and then they smudged like shaving cream outside, so you just ran toilet paper hanging and ran out and slide through the like shaving cream and just fell. It just hurt because there was no time to reflect if it wasn't serious or not. It just boom and you're up. And there's so many. I don't know if that put me off and doing pranks later because we have a lot of injuries and yeah, but it was a time where that wasn't an issue. Like it wasn't something going like, oh, you can't do this because people get injured. It was sort of like like that's just part of the game. So I don't know if that meant, but when we get to station, it was pretty much a non-spoken rule that you don't do pranks. That kind of was. I know.
Well, brother, I appreciate your time. This has been so exciting. I know I can't believe you haven't brought this up, but we have met in the past in person, and you don't even remember. So, yeah, my feelings are hurt. I try
to remember. I remember most noteworthy people, which I've learned from and met,
gun.
And think they have brought value to my life. So I'm not surprised at all. But it
might you don't remember. I'm sorry I didn't bring value to your life. You sound like my first wife.
No,
brother.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm gonna let you go. It's been a blast. I've had so much fun. Great talking to you. I hope to meet you in the future again.
Yeah, I hope so too. I would love to get to America again. It's been way too long.
Thank you, brother. Today's podcast was sponsored by Fire Facilities, designers and manufacturers of realistic, built-to-last training structures and mobile units for 35 years. Make training count. Visit firefacilities.com for more information.